now, I can just shoot you now. But because there was at least 8 other police officers in the house, they would not allow him to do that. So at that point, he told me, he said that he would make sure that when I went to court, that I would get a sentence of death. On July the 17th, 1974, the day that I did go to court, when the judge came to the courtroom, he had already typed my sentence up, saying that he was going to give me a death sentence before we went to court. When the trial actually started, the judge asked the prosecutor what did he have to say, and the prosecutor's whole argument was a confession that I gave for 2.5 hours. When the judge said to my attorney that it was his turn to respond, my attorney said, "Your Honor, we plead guilty, and you can talk to Billy." Now, I told the judge that I was pleading guilty because I was, in fact, guilty. It was not a premeditation murder. I did not plan the killing, but I did, and because of that, I was responsible. So the judge said I did a good thing, an honorable thing in pleading guilty. The judge said that I did a good thing, an honorable thing in giving the money back. But the judge went on to say that on Friday, September the 13th, 1974, I would be taken from the county jail to the state prison, and between the hours of 10 o'clock and 2, I would be executed. At that point, I was taken back to the county jail. My lawyer did not speak to me. He did not give me any further information as to what would happen. So when September the 13th came around, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed waiting for the officers to come to get me, to take me to be executed. 10 o'clock showed up, but none of the guards did. Nobody came to the cell, nobody said a word to me, and I knew that they did not forget, but I didn't know why I was not being executed. Nor was I going to volunteer asking anybody, did they forget? I mean, if they was going to forget, I was going to let them forget. Well, Monday, I got a letter from my lawyer which said, "Billy, I am sorry I forgot to tell you that you would not be executed Friday." He said that your case is going to be appealed to the Georgia Supreme Court, and I need you to tell your older sister to send me $3,000 to continue in this process. She had already paid him $9,000. I wrote my older sister and I told her to fire him, did not give him another dime, and from this point, I would represent myself. My sister complained and she said that I wasn't a lawyer and I didn't know what I was doing. And I told her, "You're right, I'm not a lawyer, but one thing I do know, I can't mess this case up. I can't make it any worse than what it is. I mean, I got the worst sentence you could get, so how could I screw it up?" So I studied a while and learned how to file a petition, and I got my police record and court transcript. In the police record was the names and the addresses of the members of the victim's family. I knew when I saw all these names that I had to write this family and apologize. I wasn't sure what to say, or what do you say to a family when you kill their father or their uncle? How do you write a letter like that? After much prayer, the letter was simple. I told them I was truly sorry for the pain and suffering that I caused them. And if they could find it in their heart to forgive me, I would appreciate it. But if they did not, I understood, because I did not forgive myself at that point. To my surprise, within 7 days, I began to get letters back from this family, and they said that we are Christian people. We believe that God has forgiven you, and we forgive you. Never had anybody in my lifetime extended that type of forgiveness or that type of love to me. I didn't understand it, so I wrote them back. and asked them simply, how could you reach a decision like that? And the family explained to me, they said, the reason why we are forgiving you is because, one, we believe this is what God wants us to do. And two, forgiveness is not solely for you, it is for us. Because if we don't forgive you, then we will be carrying around the emotions of hatred and bitterness and anger and resentment. And each one of these emotions harm us and not you. So whenever we think of you, we don't want to be harming ourselves. So in forgiving you, we are freeing ourselves from the bondage of those emotions. It was the family itself that I began to write for the whole 16 and a half years that I was on death row, that we wrote letters every week, that they helped me to finally get to the place where I could finally forgive myself. Now, because I pled guilty, none of the appeals court in the state of Georgia or in the United States really wanted to look at my case. Every ruling said, why are we looking at this case? He said himself he was guilty. So if he's guilty, we should let the execution proceed. So from 1974 to 1984, I went through 13 execution dates. But none of those dates was what we called really serious. Those dates were just to move the case from one court to the next court. However, in 1984, the state of Georgia had killed 13 men, and I got a new execution date, which was for May the 24th, 1984. On May the 21st, 2 officers came to my cell and packed up all my belongings and took me to the captain's office. In the captain's office, he said, here is your execution warrant. I need for you to read it. I need for you to sign it. I need for you to tell us that you understand that we're going to kill you at 12:15 on Wednesday night. After I sign it, he said, now I have another form I need for you to sign. And that form says, what do you want us to do with your body after we kill you? We can bury you here at the prison, or your family can come and get your body. At that point, I was given the uniform that I was going to be executed in to wear. 2 officers put chains around my waist, my arms, my legs, and then I was taken to what is called a death watch cell. This cell is no different than any other cell, except it is maybe 10 feet away from the electric chair. You can see it. So as the 2 officers were taking me to this death watch cell, they decided to stop at the electric chair. It had a white sheet like this covering it. They snatched the sheet off of it and said, Billy, look at this chair. Look at these straps. These straps will hold you down when you are being electrocuted. Look at the wood in this chair. Look how pretty it is. We want you to see it now. Because when we strap you down into 3 days from now, you're not going to be able to appreciate just how nice this chair looks. Now, the chair in and of itself did not bother me. What bothered me was the fact that I had got a manual and read, and the manual talked about what happened to people when they were electrocuted. Excuse me. In the state of Georgia, at that time, their electric chair worked in this manner. When the button was pushed, 2,300 volts would go through your body for a solid minute, and then it would stop for 30 seconds. Then at a circuit breaker, they would do it again the second time for a minute, then it would stop for 30 seconds. Then the last go around would be just 30 seconds. The doctor would come and check and see if your heart is ticking or if your body is twitching. If there's any movement at all, then the doctor tells the warden of the prison that you're not dead and you will be electrocuted again. Because the execution warrant states that you are to be executed until you are dead, completely dead. No moving, no twitching, nothing. The effects of the electric chair that I read in the manual It said when the current hits a person, it pops their eyes out of their head. It shatters their teeth. And if there's constant electrocution, the skin catches on fire. So all of these thoughts were going through my mind. These are the things that were tormenting me, not the chair itself. At that point, the two guards took me and actually put me into the death watch cell itself. The captain came by and he said, listen, let me explain to you what your rights are as a death watch inmate. If you want to look at the TV to see if there's any news about your case, you tell the guards they will turn it on. If you don't want the TV on, they cannot turn it on because their job is to watch you. Now, the job of the two guards that were watching me was sitting at a table like this, and each of the guards had a large green logbook. As I turned around in this cell and looked at them, one guard started writing. So I asked him, what are you writing? He said, oh, I write down every word you say. And the other guy, he writes down every physical move that you make. So I asked him, I said, why do you do that? So he wrote it down. He asked me, why did I do that? He said, well, we have to show society that we treated you nice before we killed you. This is our proof. Minute by minute, detail by detail, everything you did, everything you said, we have it in print, and we can prove it. So when the captain left, one of the guards said, how about turn on the TV? We don't want to look at you all day. I said, I don't want the TV on. Because the news is saying that William Moore is guilty. And the reason why the crime is increasing in the state of Georgia is because the state of Georgia has not executed me yet. So I didn't want to hear that. And because I did not allow the guard to look at the TV, they get mad at me. I make the guards upset. So they open up the green books and they begin to read the names, the words, the movements of each one of the 13 men that had been executed that I had lived with for over 10 years. I knew them personally, some were friends, and to hear what a person does minute by minute, in a constant state of fear, is none other than torture. So as they continue to go through telling me about these inmates, that was very upsetting for me. Until they got to the last one. The things that the last inmate said actually began to help me feel better. And the reason why is, before I went to Death Watch, I had started a couple Bible study groups. And this one inmate came and said he would like to join the group, and I told him that he could. I said, the rules of this is simple. We read a verse out of the Bible, and we explain it to each other, what we think it means, and how can we apply that in our life. He said, okay. So when we passed him the Bible to read, he would not read it. So later that day I asked him, I said, how come you didn't read? You said you wanted to join the group, now you're not participating. And he says, I can't read. I said, well, that's strange. Because when you came in here 5 years ago, when I first talked to you, you told me that you graduated from high school. So I don't understand that. How do you graduate from high school and you cannot read? He said, well, the teachers were passing my test for me just to get me out of school. I said, okay. I said, I can teach you how to read. I said, we got a lot of spare time. We could do that. And so as I began to try to teach him how to read, I found out that he had a mental problem. He was mentally slow. He wasn't stupid, he was just slow. But he had a special gift. He was the only person that I knew who could hear a song on the radio one time and know every word to the song. That was his gift. So he had his imaginary guitar. He'd be standing in the middle of his cell, singing at the top of his voice to the songs that he heard. I said, okay, we can work with this. So we made all his lessons in the songs. I had him sing those instead of the stuff that he was singing. And working with him in a couple of years, he was reading good, doing some writing. He came to my cell one day and he said, I have this letter from the courts and I don't understand what it is. I read the letter, and the letter basically said that he was going to be executed in 2 weeks. So I asked him who was his lawyer, and he told me he did not know. I said, all right, so you have any mail in your cell? We went through all his old letters. I found out who his attorney was. I wrote his attorney and asked him, was he aware that his client was going to get an execution date? His attorney wrote me back and said that he had already gotten that letter, that he filed a petition with the state of Georgia saying that the state of Georgia could not execute his client because he was mentally retarded. The state replied and said, if he is mentally retarded, we will not execute him. However, we will test him to see. Now, all my friend really understood when he got his letter from his lawyer was that he was going to take this important test. So I said, let me read this letter to you and explain what's going on. I said, the state is saying if you pass this test, you are competent, they will kill you. So this is what we're going to do. I will teach you how to fail this test. I will make sure that you don't pass. Everything that you learn in our class, all the words that you learn, these are road marks and signs for you. Every time you see something that you know, mark something else. That way you'll be sure to fail the test. And he tells me, he said, well, you don't get it. You don't understand it. I'm saying, what do you mean I don't understand? I said, I understand it. You don't understand it. We need to fail this test. He says, you don't know what it feels like when a teacher makes you stand up and read and you can't read and the kids laugh at you. He said, I still feel that. He said, you don't know what it feels like when you know that you are not passing tests, but they're passing you in school just to get rid of you. He said, if I can pass this test, I'm going to pass it. I said, listen, I'll make you some hard tests. You can take those. I said, I'll make them so hard that you can't pass them. You can try to pass those. He said, no, I'm going to take this test, and I'm going to pass it. He took the test and he scored 71. 1 point just be above passing. 3 days later, he was executed. The guards were telling me that he said that he was so happy that they gave him a brand new uniform to wear, the one that they executed him in. What made him happy that he was finally in his life, they were giving him all of this attention. Whatever he wanted to eat, they would give it to him. Whatever station he wanted on the TV, they would turn it. He also said that what made him the most proud was the fact that he knew that he finally passed the test that wasn't fixed for him and didn't nobody pass it but him. He also said that by learning how to read and write, it helped him to accept Christ in his life, and that made him a better person. So hearing the guards read his words to me made me feel better. I felt better because I had been carrying a burden for like 3 years. I thought I helped the state kill him by teaching him how to read and write. I had other inmates that I was helping, that I quit helping because I didn't want anybody else to get executed. But just to understand his dignity, to understand knowing that he was going to die if he passed the test, and he did it anyway, that really made me feel better. So the guards stopped harassing me that day. But the very next morning when these same two guys came back to work, they brought me a letter. Now on death watch, you're not supposed to have any mail. But now, looking back, I know that they knew what was in the letter before they gave it to me. When I looked at the return address, it was from my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law and I had a wonderful relationship. So I thought that this would be a letter to be of encouragement to me while I was going through this death watch process. But as I pulled the letter out of the envelope, I immediately noticed that it was my ex-wife's writing. As I began to read the letter, it says, "Billy, I know you're going to be executed the next few days, and I just need to clear my conscience before they kill you. I want to tell you that Billy Jr., who you think is your son, that he is not your son." Well, I thought at that point that the state was not going to have to execute me, that I was going to have a heart attack and just die. I began to feel sorry for myself. I began to cry. The only person that I thought that I had, I didn't have. And then I got real angry. You know, you go around that cycle. Now I'm on the end of the cycle. I'm at the anger cycle. And anger was telling me that if I could get my ex-wife in this cell with me today, I would really like to choke the life out of her. That's how mad I was. But after I calmed down and began to think about it, I'm saying, God, I need to get back to where I was when I had peace. How can I have peace? How can I say that the state of Georgia is wrong in wanting to kill me? At the same time, I'm willing to kill my ex-wife because of what she said. So I prayed and asked God, what do I need to do? Never ask God what you need to do if you don't want to do it. Believe me, He would tell you what to do. I knew then that I had to write her and apologize. Now, I didn't do anything to her, but I knew the only way that I was going to get my peace back is I had to write her and let her know that I wanted to kill her, and I was sorry, and I need her to forgive me. Because I knew that's what was being required of me to do. So when I wrote the letter, gave it to the guards. I don't know if they mailed it or not. They left with it. They might have threw it away. But I did what I knew I was supposed to do. At that point, I sat down on the bed, opened up the Bible, which opened up to Psalms 118. In verse 17, sort of highlighted itself in my eyes, which says, "I shall not die but live and declare the works of the Lord." I knew in my spirit and in my heart that I wasn't going to be executed, but I couldn't prove it. But I called up my lawyer. I had gotten another lawyer who was Jewish, by the way. I said, "Dan, I got some good news for you." I said, "Now God just told me that I am not going to be executed." He said, "Okay, Bill, that's good." He said, "Tomorrow morning I'll go to the courthouse and I'll say, 'Your Honor, my client said, that God said, that you're not going to execute him.'" He said, "Are you crazy? I can't do that." I said, "Well, listen, you do what you want to do. I know what I believe." So on the third day, while I was in the visiting room, the two guards came as I was seeing my two older sisters, and they told my sisters to hug me and kiss me because they were taking me back and they were going to shave my head, give me my last meal, and I was going to be executed. As we began to proceed back toward the death watch cell, by the time we got to the captain's office, he steps out of the office and says, "I just got a phone call. The execution has been stopped. Billy, come into the office. Get my new suit back. Take your old clothes. And when you get another execution date, we'll kill you the next time." I was put back on death row. Now the court that stopped the execution just 7 hours prior to it taking place, was the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in the city of Atlanta. This court had already previously heard my case 3 different times. A friend of mine's son was a clerk at the court, and he was telling his mother, he said that all 12 judges said that there was just so much confusion going on with my case that they just stopped the execution because they couldn't figure it out. Now think about that. They have already been through my case 3 times. So they should know it. They made 3 separate rulings on it. So I believe God put them all in confusion. So they just stopped. So just stop it. And then for 3 years, my friend was telling his mother that they were arguing, why did they stop the execution? At the end of 3 years, they said, well, just send it back to the lower court judge and make him straighten it out. When they made that ruling, the state appealed it to the United States Supreme Court. So instead of it going back to the lower court, it went to the United States Supreme Court. And basically, after a year of not doing anything, they turned around and said, send it back to the 11th Circuit. So it went right back to where they stopped it, and they gave me a new execution date, which is for August the 22nd, 1990. I was the last person that the state of Georgia put on death watch for 3 days. Now they have a new procedure. 24 hours prior to the execution is when you will go to death watch. So on the morning of the 21st of August, before I would be taken to death watch, some visitors came, so I went to the visiting room. At 9:30, the assistant warden came into the visiting room and said that I had a phone call from my lawyer, who told me that the United States Supreme Court had stopped this execution for 30 days. And he said he didn't understand it because he did not file any papers to the court, but they just stopped it for 30 days anyway. And so we were glad about that. And then he explained to me, he said that the State Board of Pardons and Parole, to look at is that who is the last person, there's 5 members on this board, that are the last people to look at a death penalty case before they allow the person to be executed or not, said that they would not hear my case because the United States Supreme Court had it. However, at 10:30, the State Parole Board notified the victim's family that they was going to have a hearing anyway. And they notified my lawyers. Now, all of this is taking place, and I am in the visiting room, and I have no earthly idea that this is happening. I'm telling you this as it was told to me. The parole board notified the victim's family, and the victim's family came to the parole board with all their family members, about 30 people. The victim's family said that we have been writing Billy Moore for the last 16 and a half years. We have lost one family member in this case, and Billy is our brother, and you cannot kill him. So while the family was telling the parole board that, a friend of mine named John Deere, who I started writing when he was in high school, went on through college and seminary training and became a Jesuit priest, had spent a couple of years in India with Mother Teresa. So while he was there, he had told her all about my case. So the day that he comes back to the United States is on August 21st, when the parole board is hearing my case. So he calls Mother Teresa in India and said, listen, you know I told you about Billy's case. They're talking about executing him tomorrow, so call the parole board on his behalf and speak to the parole board chairman. And Mother Teresa told him, as John relates this to me, that if the parole board want to talk to her, then they should call her. Now, I don't know how John did it, but he got word to the chairman of the parole board that Mother Teresa wanted to talk to him. So while the hearing was going on, the chairman stops the hearing and he has a press conference. In his press conference, he says Mother Teresa wants to talk to him. So he calls India. Now, I have no idea how you get on the phone and just call India and get Mother Teresa. I don't know how a person does that, if she even have a listed number. But some kind of way, he got her on the phone. And he asked her what did she want, and she told him that he and the other 4 members of the parole board need to do what Jesus would do. That day at 2 o'clock, the parole board of the state of Georgia commuted my death sentence, changed the sentence from death to life. I was still in the visiting room. My lawyers didn't call me. Nobody told me. When the guard came at 4 o'clock and said, Billy, the visit is over, I'm thinking that I'm getting ready to go to death watch. And this guard is so excited. He said, I am so happy for you. And I'm trying to figure out why is this guy happy? But he doesn't say why he's happy. He's just saying, I'm so happy for you. And it just doesn't make sense. So as we're walking down the hallway, he's introducing me to other guards. This is Billy Moore. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? Well, nobody says anything. I get back to the cell block. And before I go in, I hear all the inmates on the side that I lived on. 33 inmates screaming and banging their cups on the bars. So I think that it is a riot in the cell block. Thank you very much. I think that it's going to be some trouble. The last time the inmates did that, they had the riot squad come in, take our mattress, blanket, clothes. We were left with just our undershorts. And they took all the windows out in the wintertime for 3 months. So this is my thought process. We're in some big trouble. As I go into the cell block, I realize that the inmates are not just screaming, they're hollering out my name. And I'm trying to figure out, now, what is this about? Why are they screaming out my name? Nobody says nothing to me. Nobody tells me that my sentence has been commuted. They think I know, so they just screaming and hollering. I get my mail from the guard. I go to my cell, I sit down on the floor, and I begin to write letters to all my friends that wrote me. And I'm explaining that I got this 30-day stay from the United States Supreme Court. The television in the cell block is on. I'm not looking at it, I could hear it. By 6 o'clock, the announcer says that the United States had just sent 250,000 soldiers to the Persian Gulf for the First War in 1991. Then the announcer stops and says, and today, the parole board commuted the sentence of William Neal Moore. And I'm like, what did he say? So as I turn around and look at the TV, here is my picture. Now, all week long, when they were talking about killing me, they had my mugshot that was showing that picture. And when I look at the television this time, it's amazing that they had a picture of when I first joined the Army. I got my Army uniform on, a globe of the world in front of me, and the American flag behind me, and the announcer says, and we don't want this soldier to die either. But then he goes on and says that the parole board said that William Moore will have to serve 25 more years before they look at his case again. And I'm like, fine, I'm alive, I can do it. 25 years, what's that? I just did 16 and a half. We can do this. The next day I was taken off death row, sent to the state prison. While I was at the state prison, I met 2 inmates who was suing the parole board. They were suing the parole board because the parole board began to apply a law in the wrong fashion. In 1977, the Georgia legislature created a law and said if the parole board changed his sentence from death to life, that person has to do 25 years. If the prosecutor asked the jury to give a person a death sentence and the jury gave them life, that person has to do 25 years. But this was in 1977. The two men who sued the parole board was convicted in 1975 and 1976. So their argument to the court was that the law is not retroactive. It doesn't go backwards. It cannot apply to them. The problem is that the parole board began to apply this law to every man. It was 2,500 men in the state of Georgia that had life sentences. So all of a sudden, the parole board was tacking 25 years onto their sentence. As these two guys filed their appeal, they won their case. They gave me a copy of the law. I sent it to my lawyer in Boston, who sent it to the parole board. The parole board called the victim's family and said William Moore is no longer under the 25-year law because he was convicted in 1974. So he is eligible for parole. And the victim's family told them, said, listen, we asked you a year ago not only not to kill him, but to let him out of prison. And you told us you couldn't do that. Now that you can let him out of prison, we want you to let him out of prison. So instead of 25 years, 13 months later, after my sentence changed from death to life, I was paroled out of prison on November 8th, 1991. But the amazing thing about that is, 5 months after I get out, the ruling that the 11th Circuit made that the two guys won on was sent to the United States Supreme Court, and they reversed it back to the way it was, saying that the parole board could do whatever they want. So, to me, it's as if God has opened the door so that I get out. After I get out, it closes right back. Out of all the men in the state of Georgia that had life sentences, and even the two guys who won the lawsuit, nobody got out of prison but me. Now, I could keep you here for 17 years. I got a lot of stories, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to open this part up to questions. You can ask me any question that you want. There is nothing off limits, not unless your teacher says so. As far as I'm concerned, there's not. But anything that you want to ask, anything you think that I did not cover that you want me to cover, you can ask that. Any questions? Yes. Yeah, you have to use the mic.
I'm just wondering if you are still in touch with, with not your son, but with the person you thought that he's your son. He was your son.
Well, let me help you clear that up. He is my son.
Okay.
He's not my biological son.
Yeah. Okay.
But he is my son. He will always be my son, and I'm gonna always be his dad.
But are you in touch?
Yes. Yes, indeed I am. And that's usually the first question. Any other questions? I know you got questions, you're just scared to ask them. Now who's going to, come on now. I didn't come all the way over here for you not to say nothing. This is a long trip.
Why do you think he was the chosen one? And what do you think about the friends from the prison? Were they also good persons? Do they feel guilty for the things they done? And what are the memories about these people?
I have no earthly idea when God allowed my life to be spared and other inmates have been executed. I know 5 or 6 inmates that were not guilty. They were really innocent, and they were executed. I wish I could put my finger on why I'm still alive, but I know that part of that is the work that I have to do that God has given me to do, and that is part of this is talking to young people like yourself and going to different colleges and schools and prisons and talking to lawyers and telling people about what God has done. That's part of my mission. As to other inmates, I know in my different Bible study classes that there's at least 60 inmates whose lives have changed that was on death row. 30 of those inmates have gotten off of death row, but they're still in prison. And 30 of them is still on death row. I have seen people who you would never believe could change. Some of the meanest people who would, if they thought for 1 second that you were going to hurt them or they didn't like you, they would stab you and kill you. I have seen people like that their lives have changed. So much so, it was one person that when he told me he did, I'm like, yeah, right. Like I'm supposed to believe that. I witnessed to the guy for 10 years and I didn't even believe it. But I have seen the power of God change people's lives. Everybody in prison are not saints. That's why most of them are there, because they've gotten in some trouble. But I believe as long as a person is alive, they have the opportunity to change. Yes, sir.
You've been under torture for 16.5 years. It's absolutely unbelievable that you've maintained your health, and what has sustained you?
God, victim's family, learning to help others. I spent most of my time helping others how to read and write, helping others in the Bible study classes. I was writing anywhere from 30 to 35 letters a week to people around the country. I have some friends that are Catholic and they have a agape community in Massachusetts, and they go to all the Catholic schools and teach the seamless garment of nonviolence. So they put my name on the bulletin board, and all of a sudden I get 30 letters from 38 graders. So I have to write everybody back, individual letters. And I will continue that until they stopped writing or didn't want to write anymore. I was also studying and got a bachelor's degree in theology. And so I kept busy. But one thing I found out that is central to everybody, no matter where you are, prison starts here. You can be free and you can be in prison. In your mind, in your thought process. Or you can be in prison and be free by your thought process. Everything in prison or in society itself boils down to you having to make a choice. Even when I use the drugs, I still made a choice to use them. So that's not an excuse. Everything that the prison told me to do, that I had to do, and if I didn't do, they would beat me up. It was still a choice. I can choose not to do it, suffer the consequences, or choose to obey and let things go as they are. So when I began to really deal with the fact that everything that I did, no matter how simple it was, I talked it over in my mind about this is a choice that you have to make. So why do you want to make it? Where are you going to let it influence you? And I think in doing so, it kept my thought process going, that I never became institutionalized by just going along with the system the way the system is. And when a person does that, I think they also find freedom.
Could you tell us more what means for you forgiveness?
Tell you more what it means to me about forgiveness. Okay. The forgiveness of the family meant everything to me, in that here is a group of people who said that they're Christians, but not just Christian in lip service, that forgave me. And it wasn't the forgiveness, you know, we got different levels and degrees of forgiveness. I forgive you, don't talk to me. I forgive you and stay out of my face. I forgive you and sleep in the other room. We got all different kinds of forgiveness, which is not forgiveness, but separation. Get away from me. This family showed me that human beings can do the same type of forgiveness that when Jesus said from the cross, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. He meant that. And I never thought that we as just regular people could do that. And here's a family who had every right to say, well, we want to hate you or we want you to be executed. But they're telling me the same thing that Jesus told us to do, to forgive one another. And then when they begin to explain that forgiveness, as I was saying earlier, really helps them. Because when we don't forgive other people who've harmed us, basically they take something from us. So that whenever we see them, it's like they have power or control or authority over us by the infraction that happened. And we allow them to have it because we stay angry, we stay mad at them. And so every time we see them, you know, before we see them, we can have a nice day. But just as soon as we see them, our day is messed up because now my thought process is all about what he did to me and how I hate him. So the rest of my day has been stolen by the thought of him. Forgiveness allows us to take that authority back. Forgiveness allows us not to be imprisoned by someone else, by the thought of someone else. So when we can forgive, like Jesus says, and when you look at it in the Bible, especially in the Gospel of Matthew, right behind the Lord's Prayer, verses 14 and 15, I always ask our congregation, I said, you know, everybody knows the Lord's Prayer. Great. What about verses 14 and 15? Which start off, if you forgive from your heart, then God will forgive you. But if you do not forgive from your heart, God's not going to forgive you. Well, it's telling me it's conditional. God is saying if. Choice is yours. Now, you can choose to do this. So if it's a choice, it's not emotional. So he's telling us, you know, that we are to bring all these thoughts into our mind, into the subjection and obedience of Christ. So we're supposed to control our emotions, not our emotions controlling us. When our emotions control us, we do stupid stuff, we say stupid things. We feel that I cannot forgive this person because I don't feel like they've changed. I don't see nowhere in the Bible where God asks us to forgive somebody because they have changed. Well, I don't feel like it because if I forgive them, I'm letting them off the hook. Forgiveness doesn't let anybody off the hook. Forgiveness does not say that what you did was right. Forgiveness is liberating to me because I'm taking my authority back. I am being freed from you, the person who harmed me, and I can go on with my life. I was at a school in Boston. When I got through speaking, this young girl, about 15, stood up and she said, I don't see why that family could forgive you like that. This girl was upset. She was really upset, but I knew she wasn't mad at me. So when I tried to go over and talk to her, she just started crying and just said, I don't have nothing to do with you, get away from me, get away from me. So I just waited till she calmed down a little bit, and then eased back over there again. And I said, what's wrong? She said, well, my mother's in the hospital in a coma. And her boyfriend beat her up and put her in a coma. And I hate it. I said, okay, I can understand that. I said, but if you hate him, why are you allowing him to control you? She said, what do you mean? I said, well, earlier when you came into class, she was laughing with the other girls. You was having a good time. But then when I start talking, it triggered a memory of him, and now your day is destroyed. Look at you, you're falling apart, you're crying and stuff. And it's not because of what I said, because I know you don't know me. It's because of how you feel about him. She said, yeah, I hate him. I said, okay, let's do this little exercise then. I said, now you close your eyes. I said, now, imagine yourself in the prison cell with him, and we got him strapped down on the bed. He can't get up. I said, here's knives, guns, whatever you want. You can do whatever you want to him. And so she was pretty rough. She was pretty rough. She pulled his fingernails off. She cut his eyelids off. She said, I want you to see this. I mean, she messed him up pretty bad. And so when she got through, I said, well, how do you feel? She said, I feel bad. I said, why? She said, because now I feel like I'm just like him. I said, you are. That's what that does to you. It makes you like the person you don't want to be like because you hate them, but you have such anger and bitterness against this guy that he's controlling your whole life. You're 15 years old. Why are you going to let this man destroy your life? I said, so he's in one cell and you're in the cell next to him. And so then she tells me, well, you know, my grandmother is a minister and she's been telling me that I need to forgive him, and I guess that's what I need to do. She said, so maybe I just need to hear it from somebody else. So sometimes, you know, people just need to hear something from somebody not close to them. But she got it. And she was able to come through that and begin to live her life and not be imprisoned by the thought of somebody you don't like.
Are you still in touch with the victim family?
Am I still in touch with the victim's family? Yes, we still, well, we talk on the phone. We don't write letters too much anymore. In 95, I went down to the county where they live, and we met at the church, and it was truly like a family reunion, seeing them and being with them and crying with them and just thanking them over and over for the work that they did. Then one of the girls said, listen, my uncle, who was very close to, actually it was his brother that I killed, wants you to come to see him, and he's laying in the bed. Well, she didn't tell me that he was in a coma. Well, I get over to the house, and she leans over and whispers in his ear and said, Daddy, Billy's here. And he sits up, and he talks to me for about a half an hour, and then lays right back down into the coma. I'm like, wow. Tell me God is not doing something. But yeah, I talk to them all the time. I don't go back in the county because the sheriff found out that I was in his county again, and he told me that if I didn't leave, he would arrest me again. So I said, okay, I'll see you later. From that point on, I just call. I don't go back down there. I'm waiting for him to die or something.
How did you begin your life outside the prison?
The day I got out of prison, the pastor that came to the county jail and told me about Christ in 1974, and I accepted Christ in my life, and it changed my life, would write and visit all throughout the 17 and a half years that I was in prison. He would constantly drive all over the United States, and everywhere he went ministering, he would tell the congregation after he preached his sermon, that there was a young man in jail that he knew God was going to get out of jail, and he prayed for me. So when I got out, my first job was his driver. And I drove him all over the United States to every one of those churches that he went to. He would get up and preach this one sermon that he had called Jailhouse Rock. He would preach that sermon, get halfway through it, and stop. I said, wait a minute. He's an actor. He is a real actor type preacher, you know. And he had stopped that like he forgot something. Wait a minute. I know what I've been meaning to tell you people. You remember when I asked you to play for Billy Moore? The young man that was in prison on death row? And so if they didn't remember, then he would take them back and get them all to remember. And they said, yeah. He said, well, here he is. And so for the first 3 years of my life, being out of prison, I went from church to church to church. I got out on a Friday. Got from the prison to Rome, Georgia, where I live, like 11 o'clock at night. He said, take off those clothes the prison gave you, and here, put this suit on. We're about the same size, and it looked like we wear the same shoes, so here, a pair of shoes. We're going to church. I said, wait a minute, 11 o'clock at night? He said, yep, come on, let's go. So we go over to the church. When we get there, the church is dark, and I'm like, okay, this does not look good. But then we go through the church, and we get to the fellowship hall, and there are 600 people sitting. Been waiting on him all day. And so he has me sit over here in the corner, and he started talking to him and revving him up. And, I just want you people to know that, God is a prayer answering God. And after they get the amen and yes, and he got them revved up, then he said, okay, I just want to show you how much of a prayer answering God he is. Here is Billy. He's out of prison. So I was sort of thrust right into the middle of that. So there wasn't any time to adjust. I mean, that was it. I was there that Friday night, and Pentecostal folks usually don't go to church on Saturday, but we went to 3 churches Saturday. We was at our church Sunday morning. But instead of going to lunch, we went to another church Sunday evening, and we came back to our church Sunday night. And that's what my life was. Those first 3 years, we were ripping and running all over the country. And so I just did on the run. But I think that was probably the best thing for me.
What was your typical day in prison?
On death row. After I got off death row?
Excuse me?
After I got off of death row?
Before, in the middle of the death rows. Between off and on the death row.
On death row. On death row.
On death row. Between 3 o'clock and 6 in the morning, which was the only quiet time in the prison on death row, was my prayer time. And I had a logbook that I wrote all my friends' names down, so I prayed for everybody individually for those 3 hours. Starting at 6 o'clock, it depends. If I came out of the cell, which is after the first 6 years, I only came out of the cell 3 times. So after that, and in another prison, first thing in the morning, I would be writing letters or doing some work that I think I needed to do. At 9 o'clock, when another group would come out for 3 hours, the inmates would come to my cell and we'd do a Bible study class for an hour and a half. Then I would probably do maybe an hour and a half of exercise. And then when the next group came out of their cells, they would come to my cell and we would do the same Bible study with a different class. And then when I came out of my cell, I went to a couple other cells to do some teaching to those guys. Then I worked on my own case, and I worked on a couple other inmates' cases. I had my theological studies, and I was doing those, so, as well as writing letters. So every day I had something to do all the time. I found out that the best way to do time was not to have any idle time. Because if I just sat around and did nothing, then I began to think about how bad it was. So the way to get around thinking about how bad it was and woe is Billy, then to help other people. Yes.
Did your family ever gave up on you? I mean, like, you are not part of our family because you are a murderer, or?
Never.
Never.
Never. The only sad thing about the fact that I was on death row is when I went to Ohio to get my son, the last time I saw my mother was February 28, 1973. My mother had multiple sclerosis, so she couldn't get around and she could not come to Georgia to visit me. That was the hardest thing of not being able to see her again. But I talked to her. She was the only person that I would call with my one phone call a month until we got 2 phone calls a month. My mother died when I was in prison. And the strangest thing happened. I was up in the morning, like I usually get up, put all my clothes on so I won't go back to sleep. I'm on my knees, over my bed praying, and when I get to my mother's name, I fall asleep. I wake up, probably 2 or 3 seconds, and it happens again. So I write a note by my mother's name. At 4:30, I fell asleep twice. Something is wrong. 4:30 in the evening, here comes the chaplain. Said, I hate to tell you, but your mother died. It's okay, I understand. I sort of felt something going on earlier that morning, and I was sort of happy that she did because my mother had suffered for over 35 years with multiple sclerosis. The following year, I'm praying for my brother, my middle brother. I'm the youngest. I get to his name, I fall asleep. Get up. Try it again, fall asleep again. So right beside his name, something is happening with my brother. At the same time in the evening, here comes the chaplain again. I hate to inform you. I said, you don't have to tell me. My brother died. He said, how'd you know? I said, God is showing me in the morning. So I only had 2 sisters and the oldest brother left by the time I got out. My father was still alive when I got off death row. He came to visit me the day that the parole board changed my sentence. And my oldest brother was sitting on my right side, my dad was sitting on my left, and he turns to me and he says, I can go home now. He said, Mama's gone, I can leave. And my oldest brother said, no, Dad, we're not going to leave till tomorrow. I said, he's not talking about that. He said, now that he knows that I'm not going to be executed, he can leave. 30 days to the day he died. But he was just telling me that he was only holding on because he thought that I was going to be executed.
Have you ever spoken to your ex-wife after you came out?
I tried to contact her, but she never wanted to talk to me. And my ex-wife died of AIDS about 3 years ago from using drugs.
Will that sentence ever be abolished in America? I don't know. I don't think it's in the United States. It's in a few states, isn't it?
Will it ever be? I think it will. I think it will. There's been a few states that have abolished it in the last 5 years. And I think that America is on the road to do that, especially since we're in such hard economical times. Just think about it. The state of Georgia spent $1.5 million trying to kill me over 16 years. The state of California got 660 inmates on death row, and the majority of them have been there for more than 30 years. And if it's just like if they just spent $1 million on each one of them each year, how much money is the state of California spending? Because I think the economy is so bad that most states are going to stop capital punishment, not because they don't want to, probably because they cannot afford to. With the appeal system and the special units that the inmates have to be in, it's just costing. There was a study done that said that you can keep a person in prison for 50 years and spend less than $500,000.
I think it's terrible for people who can do things like that. How can they live?
They think they're right. The people that does that, they believe that they are doing God's will. And you know, there's been a lot of people killed by folks thinking that they're doing God's will. You had a question?
Same question.
Same question? Here we
What
go.
can we do to abolish, help to abolish that sentence?
What can you do? Good question. Now, the United States is always in the business of telling other countries what they should do and what they shouldn't do. Because the United States act like they are the police of the world. It is time for other countries to begin to tell the United States that you are wrong in capital punishment, and any type of support that they have should be withdrawn, like the United States do. When they have countries that they don't believe in the policies that they have, they stop supporting them. If other people would stop supporting the United States. Money talks. And the people that's concerned about the money are the ones who are concerned about capital punishment. Don't think just because you are a small country that you have a small voice. Everybody's voice matters. Every person matters. And you can make a difference. Even if you just tell other people. Even if you just share the story that you've heard with other people, so they'll know the things that men on death row go through. It would really help.
Have you met anybody who would choose execution instead of living in the prison for your entire life? And
I have met about 3 inmates who refused to appeal their case because they understood what the appeal process was and it would take a long time. And usually when you have guys who ask the state to execute them, they have been in prison before and they know what prison is like and they don't want to do it. So they figure the easy route and the easy way out is to make the state kill them. And so some of them have. I had one friend on death row who was so terrified of being executed that he said he was going to make sure that the state did not kill him, but that he would die on an operating table. So everything that this man could get his hand on that he could swallow, he did. And he had at least 15 surgeries. He was cut from here all the way down in his stomach to the bottom of his stomach. And they were constantly taking things out of him that he swallowed. He was so terrified that he would come back from the hospital and lay on the bed and rip his stomach back open so he didn't go back. And he continued to do that until he died because he did not want to be executed.
I don't understand another thing. I think I heard about the case, it was a few months ago. There was a man and he was executed, but many people went on the streets and protest because there was not enough evidence that he's really guilty, but he was still executed. And I just don't understand why government is not moved by that people know somebody is innocent, but they still go on with the process.
You're talking about the case in Atlanta, Georgia, inmate named Troy Davis. In Troy's case, there was supposed to be nine witnesses that testified against him. And of the 9 witnesses, 7 recanted their testimony. 1 died, and the other person who did not recant his testimony was the one that the other 7 said that did it. The United States Supreme Court and other courts' position is when testimony is given that is close to the trial, they believe that that is the most reliable because people remember more close to what happened than the memory when years have passed. So the court basically refused to allow people to change their testimony. They're saying that if you want to change your testimony, then how are we to know which one is the truth that you're saying now? The 7 that changed their testimony, each one of them had a reason why. From the pressure that the police put on them, the ladies were told that the police was going to take their kids. The guys, most of them were threatened with being charged with the same charge. And so when the Supreme Court ordered that a hearing be conducted, the judge that conducted the hearing refused to accept any of the testimony that had been changed by the 7 witnesses and allowed Troy Davis to be executed. What I think that happens in situations like that, and it's been 3 other cases in the United States that were really big cases. What I see is the issue involving the death penalty becomes far more important than the inmate. And the court believes that if they kill the inmate, they will kill the issue. The issue in this case is that the Supreme Court never allows what they call a second habeas corpus to be issued in a case that does not show that the person is completely innocent. Now, in Troy Davis' case, there was the possibility that these witnesses was bringing forth this type of evidence. But the underlying factor would have been, had Troy gotten off death row, that the Supreme Court had made a ruling in his case allowing new evidence in, where previously they said that you can't do that. So had they allowed this, then other cases would be able to come and say, well, you've done this in Troy's case, and so you should be able to do this in our case. And what the court does in situations like that, rather than to allow a new rule to be made, they will let a person die. And I have seen them do that over and over. So if there's any type of ruling that's going to come out of the court that would be a broad ruling that would help, like the majority of the people on death row, then they would sacrifice the inmate in whose case it is to kill the issue. And that's what they do.
Are you for first time here in Europe talking about your life, or have you been here before?
I have been to Italy. This is my 3rd time. I have been to England twice and South Africa once.
Have you written a book about your life?
I have written a book about the 7 hours that I was on death, 3 days that I was on death watch. The title of the book is called I Shall Not Die, 72 Hours on Death Watch. And the book goes in great detail explaining the 3 days that I was on death watch. I'm in the process of writing the rest of my story, as well as writing another book that I actually started when I was in prison, and the title of that one is God in Capital Punishment. What does God really say about capital punishment, and what is America doing saying that this is what God says? You know, United States want to tack God's name on everything they do and say, this is approved by God, so this is why we believe it. And so I'm showing in this second book that that is not the case. One of the things it clearly states in the Old Testament that there is one law, and you can't add to it, and you can't take from it. But in that one law, there's many different parts to it. Just by virtue of the fact that the United States only used the death penalty for murder is not in line with the Old Testament law that they say that you're following. Because there is a capital punishment in the Old Testament for rape. There is capital punishment in the Old Testament for if you have a drunken and disobedient child that won't obey their parents, that child was allowed to be stoned. So I go through all of them, it's like 42 of them, and explain this is what the Bible teaches, and this is what America's doing. And we see what people generally call the Ten Commandments, that the United States want to say that this is mandatory. But nowhere in the Old Testament does it say that it's mandatory. What I see God was doing with this law was telling Israel, okay, wait a minute. You guys are getting crazy. Now, if somebody knocked your eye out, you can't kill them. You can't do that. Most you can do is you knock their eye out, but you don't have to. Nowhere does it say that you have to knock their eye out. But if you want revenge, that's all you can do. So it's a limit. It's limiting what people could do to one another. And that's what that is. But when you look at the Bible in totality, you see from beginning to end God's mercy and grace. Because one of the things I say, if God was really into killing people, and it seemed like he would have killed Cain, the first murderer. But he didn't kill Cain, he wouldn't let nobody else kill Cain. And of course, everybody loves King David, right? The greatest king in Israel. King David was an adulterer and a mass murderer. He didn't just have Bathsheba's husband killed, Uriah. He got a whole bunch of other soldiers killed just to kill him. But then God sent the prophet Nathan to him to tell him this little story about this man who took another man's sheep. And David said, that man's going to die. And Nathan said, David, you are that man. But God's not going to kill you. So God is not a law violator of his own law. He was showing mercy to David. Is that rain or train or what?
Rain.
I want to get back safe. Any other questions?
Maybe Billy, you could just tell us what you're doing in these days. What's your job? What's your apart from going around the world and talking about your experience?
That's it. That's my job. That's what I do. That's
Only that?
Yeah, that's what I believe God is kept me alive to do. Besides ministering at the church in Rome, I think it is my job to tell people about the miracles we see in the Bible. Hadn't stopped with Revelations. That God is still in the miracle working business. I believe with all sincerity that I am a miracle. There's absolutely no reason, logical reason why I should be alive, other than it is God's will for me to be alive. How do you go from sitting on death row, pleading guilty to a crime that you commit, to going around the world talking about it? Can be nothing but the Lord. in my book. So, you know, that's what I'm doing. And that's what I'm going to do as long as there's breath in this body. And I just want to thank each one of you. I mean, it is so nice to do this in English every now and then.
So, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Se zahvaljujemo tudi skupnosti svetega Egidija, Federiki in prijateljem, da so prišli, da so se spomnili tudi letos na nas in pripeljali tako dobrega gosta s tako močnim pričevanjem. Hvala lepa, Federika.
Hvala vam za gostoljubnost in za povabilo, ker vas je vedno veselilo.